This is question 1 from paper 2 of the 2017 A2 paper. Let's have a read through the question. It says exercise causes an increase in heart rate. Describe the role of receptors and of the nervous system in this process. So basically, if you start to exercise, how does your heart know to beat faster? Well, if you remember that chemoreceptors are found in the wall of the carotid arteries. They're the arteries that leave the heart to serve the brain. They're also found in the aortic arch. Of course, when you exercise more, you make more carbon dioxide. When you make more carbon dioxide, that makes your blood become more acidic. Remember, carbon dioxide is an acidic gas. We know that because we hear about acid rain all the time. A high acid can also be discussed as a low pH or a high hydrogen ion content. So you can gain the first mark by saying that chemoreceptors detect a rise in carbon dioxide or hydrogen ions or acidity or a fall in pH. For the second mark, we're then going to say that the chemoreceptors send impulses to the cardiac centre in the medulla oblongata of the brain. Remember, in biology, we're always talking about where things move from and where they move to. Now, at this point, I need to check back with the question to check where I'm going with my answer. And I've rephrased it. How do receptors cause an increase in heart rate after exercise? So the next thing I'm going to say is that a higher frequency of impulses are sent to the sinoatrial node from the cardiac centre in the medulla oblongata. The question already tells us that exercise causes an increase in heart rate. So we need to just point out that it's the sympathetic nervous system that's going to do that. So the neuron that carries the information from the cardiac centre in the medulla oblongata to the sinoatrial node will be the sympathetic nervous system. Now, according to the examiner's report, only 10% of students managed to gain all 4 marks for that question, and 25% of students didn't obtain a single mark. And the reason why was because of poor terminology, particularly when describing nerve impulses as messages or signals. So just stick to impulses. Don't use messages because that's very GCSE, and don't use signals because what does that actually mean anyway? Okay, looking at the second half of the question, AMP-activated protein kinase is an enzyme that regulates a number of cellular processes. Exercise leads to activation of AMPK. Figure 1 shows one effect of activation of AMPK during exercise. So let's have a look at this flow chart, but I'm going to start from the end and work backwards. Because normally CPT1 transport of fatty acids would take place into the mitochondrion. However, malonyl-CoA inhibits that. So therefore, high malonyl-CoA is going to stop the uptake of fatty acids, whereas low malonyl-CoA will allow fatty acids to be transported into the mitochondrion. Now, looking at the flowchart, acetyl-CoA normally converts to malonyl-CoA. However, AMK inhibits that. So therefore, when we get AMK produced during exercise, we will end up with low levels of malonyl-CoA, which means that there'll be no inhibition of fatty acids moving into the mitochondria. So therefore, we'll have increased fatty acids moving into the mitochondria. So breaking this down into our 3 marks for our answer, I'm going to say if AMK is activated, then there will be less malonyl-CoA. That will give me my mark. Then I'm going to write malonyl-CoA usually inhibits the transport of fatty acids into the mitochondria. So without malonyl-CoA, fatty acids are transported into the mitochondria and fatty acids can be respired to produce ATP. When I check back to the question which asks me, explain the benefits of activation of AMPK during exercise, I can see that I've answered that in that last sentence, that fatty acids can now be respired to produce ATP. That is the benefit because, of course, ATP can then be used for muscle contraction. So my top tip for this question would be, if you're struggling to understand a flowchart like this, working forwards, try it backwards and see if it makes more sense then. After all, in this instance, it would make more sense that fatty acids were allowed into the mitochondria during exercise because it's another respiratory substrate. I hope the video has been of use, and please do leave me a comment.